Hello, everyone. This is Judy Maddox. I'm chair of our Western North Carolina Sierra Club, also known as Wenoca, W-E for Western, N-O for North, C-A for Carolina. You can find us on Facebook and on Meetup. We want to welcome you to tonight's webinar program on electric vehicles. The future is now. But the first thing that I want to do is to profess a profound sorrow, and I'm sure that we are all experiencing a myriad of feelings about the death of George Floyd and other African Americans. The Sierra Club, as well as all of us individually, are committed to work hard to help create a world where no one would experience fear or inequities regardless of their skin color. Wenoca.org, our website, has a red social action button that you can click to find our recommendations or possible social actions that you can take. The second thing I want to also acknowledge the virus, COVID-19, and the need for all of us to stay safe and well. We have changed our Sierra Club meetings, as you know, to an online Zoom webinar format to keep you safe and to keep us safe. We've been doing this as of our April and May programs. Our next online program will be always the first Thursday of the month, and this time July 2nd, right before the July 4th holiday, and it's on bears, bear-wise, barely there, safe encounters with bears, both at home and in the wild. Ashley Hobbs of our North Carolina Wildlife Resources is a great presenter. You have to advance register just like tonight. The link is posted as of now on our Western North Carolina Sierra Club website, wenoca.org. Next, I want to remind you, the time is running out. Our wonderful Nantahala Pisgah Forest revision plan comments are due by the end of this month. You can write as many times as you want. Please go again to our website. Again, this magic red button. The recommendations are written in the website. Your letter will be sent by us if you so choose, or you can send it to the address that we have listed there, but you need to personalize. So we want in your personalization, please, at least 3 comments. Number 1, support our Big Ivy Craggy National Scenic Area. This is our area. Number 2, ask for standards to define what old growth is. Right now it's not defined, and that it be unsuitable for logging. Number 3, support wilderness recommendations, wilderness extensions, backcountry North Carolina heritage areas, and special interest areas as unsuitable for logging and should be managed as such. We also have a recommendation that this Monday at noon, this Monday, June 8th, the U.S. Forest Service will be having an online conference call that you can call in and say in person to the people who are making the decisions on this plan. So again, Monday at noon, and we'll post that number. And lastly, for action, our old friend, the Duke rate hike request hearings are back. They've been extended from May into July. So if you have not written your comment, it's very important right now that you do, because Duke is requesting 14.3% increase in money every month in everyone's bill. And right now with COVID and people out of work and people food insecure, that is unconscionable. So please, in your comments, once again, personalize, say no to more investments for fossil fuel plants. Please say no to ratepayers paying for coal ash cleanup. That's not what we need. That was not our decision. And number 3, demand that Duke start investing in future renewable energy instead of fossil fuels. The comments go to the North Carolina Public Utilities Commission Again, they're posted on our wenoca.org. So right now, I'm going to introduce you to Dave Erb, our retired automotive engineer, who will tell you lots of credentials. So the electric vehicles, the future is now. So yay, Dave.
Thank you, Judy. Let me get my screen to share here. Okay, again, my name is Dave and my last name is Erb, spelled E-R-B. I want to thank the Wenoca Group for inviting me to be here tonight. I'm an automotive engineer. I spent most of my career as a college professor, but I also had time as a consultant. And I actually started my career as a test and development engineer in the truck and bus industry, heavy truck and transit bus industry. Most of my work, I did a lot of things over that career, but most of my work had to do with energy and emissions. And I started working with electric vehicles. I worked with pretty much any fuel you've ever heard of and did paper studies on some you probably haven't heard of. But I started working with electric vehicles in '86. And by the early 90s, it was pretty clear to me that that was the future of transportation. And so for probably about 25 years now, that's been pretty much my sole focus, almost exclusive focus as an automotive engineer. I've worked on about 50 electric and hybrid electric vehicle development projects, of which I'd say a dozen were mine, where I had a leadership role and significant blood, sweat, toil, and tears invested in them. I'm also an author. Driving to Net Zero is a book that was put together by my friend Dave Frivnak. It's a collection of 15 first-person accounts of families that are driving on sunshine. They've combined electric vehicles with solar houses and other sustainability strategies. And I had the privilege of writing chapter 1. You can get that on Amazon if you're bored during this quarantine. And in fact, I'd be perfectly happy for you to contact me and I'll sell it to you for $10 cheaper than Amazon does. But the main reason I put my contact information up here is I speak publicly about transportation and electric vehicles and the electric grid and renewable energy quite frequently. I'd love for you to speak to your group if you'd like. And I'd also love to continue the conversation we're starting tonight here. If you want to have a one-on-one conversation, I would welcome contact from anybody who'd like to contact me. What I want to do tonight, have just real quick, one slide story of where we are and how we got here with EVs in the US market. And then I want to broaden the lens to transportation more generally, but with a very significant focus on comparing electricity to the other options we have for energy and addressing the pervasive, extensive mis and disinformation that's out there in the public discourse about electric vehicles. We should have time for some Q&A at the end. I'm not sure how soon after the hour's up we'll get cut off, but I'll stay here as long as the screen's running. But please use the Q&A button, the Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen when you want to do that, and then Judy will read the questions to me. So I use the term EV or electric vehicle very inclusively. For me, it means any vehicle that gets a significant amount of its traction from an electric motor. And the first vehicles were steam vehicles, and about 100 years later came electric vehicles, and then 5 years after that came internal combustion vehicles. So internal combustion is 1885, the electric vehicles are about 1880, and we all know who won that battle, right? The internal combustion basically took over, but electric vehicles didn't go away. They lived in these little minor niches for over a century. But when you're talking about the modern day mass market, highway capable electric vehicle that you might put in your garage to be your personal car, for US customers, that market starts in December of '99. That's when Honda first showed up with the Insight in their dealers. The Prius showed up at the Toyota dealers about a month later. And those were charge sustaining HEVs, the H standing for hybrid, meaning they have a gasoline engine as well as the electric motor. The charge sustaining piece means that they manage the charge in the batteries by the way they burn fuel in the engine and control the brakes of the cars. You could see that charge-sustaining nature in a lot of the early advertising for those vehicles. They were built as the electric car you never plug in. These cars don't have plugs on them. But most of the benefit of electrification comes from plugging in as opposed to fueling at the gas pump. And so 11 years later, to the month, we got our first PEVs, that plug-in electric vehicles. There were 2 of them, and they took 2 very different approaches. The Nissan Leaf is a BEV, a battery electric vehicle, a pure electric vehicle, some people would say. Think of it like a cell phone on wheels. You drive it around when the battery gets low, you plug it into the wall and recharge the battery. The Chevy Volt is a PHEV or a PHEV. It's a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. It drives around as an electric vehicle, just on electricity, just like the Leaf does. But when the battery gets low, you can either plug it into the wall and recharge it, or you can just keep going and it will seamlessly turn into a charge-sustaining hybrid. And you can drive it just like a charge-sustaining HEV or a conventional internal combustion vehicle. As long as you put gas in the tank, it'll drive. You never have to plug it in if you don't want to. Now, I've worked in this field for about 40 years, 4 decades, and it's really clear to me with all the data I've looked at that as North Americans, if we want to sustain the access that we enjoy from our transportation system, the main benefit of our transportation system, we really need to do 4 things. And you can take any of these steps in any order. They all work independently, but I've listed them here in order of effectiveness. You'll get your most bang for your buck by just reducing your demand for motorized travel. We're doing that right now. We're in a Zoom meeting. We didn't drive anywhere to get there. The second most effective thing we can do is use our vehicles more productively when we do drive them. The third thing is to electrify the powertrains to the maximum extent that's feasible. Not every vehicle will go to full battery electrification. Not every vehicle will even go to plug-in electrification. But we need, and that's dictated by the vehicle mission much more than by the vehicle itself. But we need to electrify as far as is reasonable, as is feasible for the vehicle mission that we're talking about. And then finally, since the vast majority of those missions are going to lend themselves to plug-in levels of electrification, we need to put more renewable electricity on the grid. I'm going to argue that we should be emphasizing distributed photovoltaic systems, kilowatt scale systems on everybody's home or business. Right now, our policy really pushes utility scale systems in great big centralized megawatt and gigawatt scale farms, but those will really happen anyway. They're logical financially. If we want a policy approach, it would, the energy democracy that comes from distributed photovoltaics and other reasons for doing it make a lot of sense. We should be pushing that. Now, people who've done a lot of sustainability work will notice a pattern in these 4 steps. Conservation enables technology. If you look at the first 3 steps, they're all conservation steps. And then the third and fourth steps are technology steps. The technology steps are made much more effective by the fact that we conserved in the first place. If you want a way to remember those steps, just picture a motor scooter and a solar panel. The first step is to reduce demand. You're not going to make a commute from Asheville to Greenville and back every day on a scooter. So we've probably got that one taken care of. Second step is to improve the productivity. A scooter is about perfectly matched to its load, which is really the name of the game in productivity. Third step is to electrify. An electric scooter will consume well under 100 watt-hours of energy per mile. Just for comparison, a gasoline scooter consumes over 300. So this is what I'm saying. Electrification is both a conservation step and a technology step. And then the fourth step is renewables. A 200-watt photovoltaic panel, which is actually pretty small by today's standards, will put 600 watt-hours of electricity out every day, year-round average. That's an average. It'll be more in the summer and less in the winter, but that's pretty much anywhere in this country. Here in Asheville, it's more like 900 watt hours a day. So if you took these 4 steps to this level, you'd get well over 5 miles a day of clean transportation at a very affordable price. And there's nothing that OPEC nor Donald Trump nor any of the other boogeymen in the world can say about it. We have free will. It's a free country. And so these steps are going to look different for everybody who chooses them. Not everybody's going to do them all, in fact. But it will look different for all of us. For my wife and me, we have a house on a fairly small lot, pretty close to downtown Asheville. I actually walked to work for 10 years. We have 6 kilowatts of solar panels on the roof. They take the house well past net zero. They generate in the course of a year more energy, more electricity than the house consumes. And it is a totally electric house. We don't have a propane tank or a wood stove or a gas line or anything like that. They generate enough to run the house and to drive an electric car about 5,000 or 6,000 miles a year. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, we now have 2 electric cars and we drive a lot more since I retired. So we drive about 15,000 miles a year. And so we're not at net zero if you count both the cars and the house, but we're working on it. Excuse me. That work is made a lot easier by the fact that it pays for itself. If you put solar on your roof at present day prices, you roll the cost of it into your mortgage, and then you trade in your Prius for an electric vehicle, a plug-in vehicle. That transaction is comparable to locking in a 30-year supply of gas for $1.23 a gallon. If you trade in a more typical car that gets 25 miles per gallon instead of a Prius that gets 50 miles per gallon, it's like locking in gas for 62 cents a gallon. And I'm being really, really, really conservative here. I've left off 3 very significant things in this spreadsheet just for the sake of simplicity, all of which work to the advantage, make this approach look even better. So I'm being real conservative when I say those numbers. It's a slam dunk financially. There's also really good vehicular reasons to go electric. An electric motor is just a great device for driving the wheels of a land vehicle. And so for reasons that have nothing to do with cost or energy or emissions, as an engineer, I would really like to use an electric motor to drive the wheels of my car. But frankly, market forces were never going to take us there. People who argue that the market will give you whatever you want just do not understand the auto industry, frankly. So it took a law to get these vehicles on the road. And specifically, it took the California Air Resources Board back in 1990, deciding that their low emission vehicle, their vehicle emission standard was going to stop being one standard and have 4 tiers in it, all of which were designed to push the technology, and they applied to differing percentages of the cars that were sold there. The strictest one of those tiers had 0 mobile source emissions, and that's not just tailpipe emissions, that's also evaporative emissions at the car. The car did not emit, and they chose to label that ZEV for zero emission vehicle, which drove all the right-wing talk show hosts into a tizzy. Their hair was on fire, ranting and raving about how, don't those idiot Californians know that electricity doesn't just magically appear? These are really just coal-fired cars with longer tailpipes. And there is some truth to the long tailpipe argument, and I'm going to come back to it. But the fact is, those Californians knew exactly what they were doing. People in my business get really focused on the field to wheels energy cycle. We start at the oil field, the coal field, the cornfield, wherever it is you're getting primary energy. And we take that energy all the way through all the conversions it takes to get out to where the rubber meets the road. And on that total cycle, electric vehicles significantly reduce both global emissions and global consumption of primary energy. And again, I'm going to come back to that later. There's another really seriously important, some might even say the most important reason why you need to go electric. with fossil fuels, what we're doing is we are digging up and burning ancient solar energy that was stored underground eons ago. If we're going to be sustainable, we have to shift over to using current solar energy in something pretty close to real time. And so there's really only two ways to do that. One is that you can generate electricity. So you can do that with wind or with hydropower or with sunshine, all of which are forms of solar energy. The other way to do it is by growing your energy. Excuse me. Store the energy photosynthetically. But the trouble with that photosynthetic approach is that photosynthesis, for all its benefits and all its essential nature, we'd all be dead if it wasn't happening. It's extremely, extremely inefficient, by orders of magnitude less efficient than the electric technologies. And you might be inclined to say, what difference does efficiency make? The fuel is free. Who cares if we waste a little bit of it? But efficiency matters when you're collecting solar energy, because it dictates how much space it takes, how much land you have to dedicate to collecting that energy. And so if we shift our emphasis away in growing things, away from food and fiber and over to fuel, that's a decision, a conscious decision, because of the fact that there's only about 2/3 of an acre of arable land per person on this planet. And because freshwater and topsoil are stretched even thinner than that, that decision to grow fuel, to grow energy, is actually a decision to starve a couple billion of the world's poorest people. And it's not so that we can avoid, it's not so that we can feed the cars of the richest billion. It's so we can avoid changing the way we feed the cars of the richest billion. Biomass energy and biofuels, frankly, they're not just crimes against nature, they are crimes against humanity, and we need to be fighting them tooth and nail. Now, if I could only have one message to convey tonight, it would be that electric vehicles are not the future. Driving on sunshine is not the future. Electric vehicles and solar energy are ready for prime time today. If you hold Sierra Club values dear, then there's really almost no legitimate reason why you should ever again buy a car that doesn't have a plug on it. And that's a really important message. That's my most important message tonight, because we're constantly bombarded with the exact opposite message. If you watch TV, if you read the paper, you get this constant bunch of people telling you that technology, especially battery technology, just isn't there yet, or the cars are still too expensive, or there's no place to charge them, or even if you could find a charger, it's so inconvenient to do it, or these cars, electric vehicles, are actually worse for the environment than Hummers are. I mean, it goes on and on and on, and it's all nonsense. And so I want to talk in a formal way about two of those items, and then I hope some of the others might come up in the Q&A at the end. The first one I want to revisit is the long tailpipe argument, the notion that we're just moving the pollution. And before I do that, I want to emphasize that when we're talking about emissions, there's two kinds, and they really have to be approached as two separate things. Criteria pollutants are the noxious emissions that we've been regulating since the 60s, the 1960s. We actually started trying to regulate them back in the 1940s, but it took almost 20 years to get to the point where we could politically make it happen. But these are the pollutants that have been reduced with all the driving going down, and the reason that air has been so clear these last 2 months. They're oxides of nitrogen, carbon monoxide, particulate matter, really the nasty stuff, the noxious stuff. But if a utility is running a legal power plant, if they're operating the power plant within legal specifications, then that, and most are, not all, but most are, then an electric vehicle charging from that power plant will represent an improvement over an internal combustion vehicle in terms of criteria pollutants. It's just so much easier, both technologically and logistically and politically, to keep a couple thousand centralized stationary power plants clean, and they're owned by people with deep pockets, as opposed to trying to keep a couple 100 million mobile vehicles, which are owned by people across the economic spectrum, clean. So criteria pollutants, people will still tell you otherwise, but it's been well established for at least 15 years that a legal power plant represents an improvement in criteria pollutants. Greenhouse gas emissions, which are what we're talking about when we talk about carbon footprint, because it's mostly carbon dioxide that we're concerned with. They're a little more of a mixed bag, a little more nuanced bag. That greenhouse gas emissions basically boil down to what is the fuel you're using and how efficiently is the power plant turning it into electricity. And so people have been working for some time to quantify what are the greenhouse gas emissions associated with charging electric vehicles. But the one I really like a lot is the Union of Concerned Scientists. They set out shortly after the Leaf and the Volt hit the showrooms to quantify that. And in early 2012, they published a report using the most current data at the time, which was from 2009, on the greenhouse gas emissions associated with charging an electric vehicle. And they did two things that I think were really important. The first is they recognize that even though it's all one grid, in theory, it's all one grid, and you could power the neon lights in South Beach in Miami with electricity generated by a hydro dam up in British Columbia. That's theoretically possible, but that's not how it really works. There are smaller subdivisions of that one grid that are more appropriate for how we generate electricity in terms of how we control it and what the generating mix is, things like that. But you can take it too far. There are quite small areas called balancing authorities, which are actually too small. And so one of the things that I think that UCS did that's really valuable and really right is they chose the appropriate scale. They chose these subgrids, regional subgrids that are shown here as the scale on which to analyze the greenhouse gas emissions. And the second thing they did is they recognized that greenhouse gases and fuel economy are almost perfectly correlated. They're as perfectly correlated as anything gets in the real world. And so back when this report was being prepared, the best hybrid on the market got 50 miles per gallon. And so what they did is they color-coded this map where the light blue is better than the best hybrid that was on the market at the time. The middle color of blue is equivalent to most of the hybrids at the time, and the darkest blue is equivalent to the best conventional vehicles at the time. And so to me, this map just shows beyond the shadow of a doubt that electric vehicles are a great thing. Here's the worst subgrid in the whole country. It's over in Colorado in the Rocky Mountains. And the equivalent miles per gallon are 34 miles per gallon. Well, the average new car in the US it changes from year to year depending on the vehicle mix sold that year, but it's typically between about 25 and 27 miles per gallon. And so even in the worst subgrid in the country, an electric vehicle emits only 3/4 as much greenhouse gases as the average new car. And over here in upstate New York, the electric vehicle emits 1/4 of the greenhouse gas emissions of the average new car. So they're great, they're fantastic, but you would have never known that from the media coverage of this study. The New York Times, most of the broadcast networks published pieces about this study that basically said, you know, those EV drivers may be smug, but they sure are stupid. They don't even know that a hybrid is cleaner in all but a handful of states in this country. Now, that is wrong on so many levels. I can't begin to count them, but let me count a few. First off, if you're talking about clean, criteria pollutants are the most important ones. And again, we're cleaner everywhere with criteria pollutants, even than hybrids. And secondly, they fail to understand that most of the EVs in this country are actually sold in the best states there on that map. Over half the EVs in this country are sold in California. Some of those reports, those pieces that said that EVs were stupid, actually lied when they counted the handful of states. They would leave, some of them left out California because down here in the Imperial Irrigation District, you're not part of the California Independent System Operator. You're part of this Arizona New Mexico system. But the most egregious thing that those articles did is they completely ignored, just blew off the main point that UCS was trying to make when they did this, when they wrote the report for this study. And that is, this picture is a snapshot. It's frozen in time, but time moves on. UCS has gone back since 2012. And again, this is 2009 data, but they've gone back since this report, and they made the same analysis with 2012 data and 2014 data and 2016 data. And just this February, they published one with 2018 data. And I hope you see the difference. Now, let's take a look at this one. The worst spot in the country now is the island of Oahu in Hawaii. And that's an interesting one because the Hawaiian legislature has mandated, they've passed a law that says Hawaiian utilities will be 100% renewable in 25 years, by 2045. And the fact of the matter is they're going to beat that by maybe 10 or 15 years because Hawaiian utilities generate electricity with diesel fuel. It comes in on tankers from across a minimum of 2,400 miles of ocean, and it's expensive as all get out. It's actually cheaper in Hawaii to go off grid, put the solar on your roof and put batteries to store it than it is to buy the electricity from the utility. So for economic reasons, Hawaii is going to clean up really fast. The other thing about this map really should probably have every one of those mile per gallon numbers multiplied by about 1.5. They should be increased by about 50% because over 1/3 of the people who have plug-in cars also have installed enough solar to charge those cars. So really here in North Carolina, we should probably be calling that 125 or so miles per gallon rather than 85. To give credit where credit's due for those of us who've put the solar on our roof and are contributing individually to cleaning up that grid. So here's the bottom line. Those maps covered, you saw how much improvement there is in those maps in 9 short years. And the most recent one of those maps is already 2 years out of date. It's using 2018 data. But the average car on a US road is 12 years old. So if you bought a new EV today, we won't even have the map that best describes its lifetime emissions for another decade or so. This is, I mean, by that point in time, even the involuntarily retired coal executives are going to be generating power with solar on their roof. The other thing that I want to talk about right now that constantly comes out in the public discourse is charging. Typical gasoline cars in the US market are designed with a fuel tank size to give them about 350 miles of range. And only the very most expensive Teslas do that. So very expensive cars that can do that same range. So people will whine about the car doesn't go far enough on a charge. They'll also complain that it takes way, way too long to charge the car. I mean, I'm going to be sitting there holding the charger for 10 hours or overnight or whatever. You know, it's going to be so inconvenient. And then the third thing they gripe about is there's not enough chargers. There just aren't enough chargers out there. And so you can't do anything except just run around town with your car. All of these things are nonsense. And they kind of get lumped under a name which I really hate, called range anxiety. So here's the bottom line. Here's the the cold, hard reality of range anxiety. Anxiety is a form of mental illness. It's a crippling fear that comes from irrational thinking and ignorance. And I can't cure irrationality, but I know the cure for ignorance, and that's experience. Market research people have put electric vehicle drivers under a microscope for decades. I've read detailed market research studies on EV drivers for 25 years. And it really doesn't matter whether you're talking about the EV1 20 years ago, or this Mini E that I'm showing in the picture here 10 years ago, or a Nissan Leaf today. What the market researchers will tell you is that people who actually have experience with electric vehicles do not suffer from range anxiety. It's actually a manufactured fiction. And I mean that in the most literal terms imaginable. I have been working with electric vehicles since 1986. They've been the focus of my life since the early 90s. And I never once heard the phrase range anxiety until the summer of 2010. And all of a sudden, it was everywhere. You couldn't read or hear or see anything about electric vehicles without seeing that phrase. And that did not happen organically and virally and without premeditation. That was planted. In the summer of 2010, Nissan and Chevy were both about to bring plug-in vehicles to market, and General Motors already had a black eye in the electric vehicle community because of most EV enthusiasts had seen Who Killed the Electric Car, and General Motors is one of the villains in that movie. And they're actually not a villain now, but they have been over various times. But they were one of the villains in that movie. So EV people were already predisposed to not like GM. And so the second thing is plug-in hybrids. There's a lot of purists out there who think that's somehow impure and you can't sully yourself with that. You gotta have a pure electric vehicle. Never mind that you can get 80 or 90% of the benefit by having a plug-in hybrid with zero inconvenience. Plug-in hybrids actually make a lot of sense. But General Motors needed to do battle in that scenario. And so what do? They do what an awful lot of advertising does. They try to scare people. And they actually applied for a trademark for this term, range anxiety. They were turned down, and it probably was good for them that they were turned down, because it probably flew a lot farther by the fact that everybody could use it. But it's a totally manufactured fiction. If you look at the way we actually use electric vehicles in this country, you'll see something like this. Back about 20 years ago, 15 or 20 years ago, I forget the exact date, Georgia Tech instrumented a whole bunch of cars in the metropolitan Atlanta area. And that's an important area because it has some of the longest commutes in the country. But they turned those cars loose with instrumentation for just shy of 3 years. And they knew pretty much everything about their operation. They had GPSs on them, and they were recording all this information like minute by minute, second by second. So they had GPSs, so they knew not only where they were, but how fast they were moving. They knew if the key was on or off, so they could distinguish between parking and traffic jams. And they even knew when the gas cap was open or closed. And so they could tell not just when and where you fueled up, but they could tell how long it took. And then they knew a bunch of other things. That's not all they instrumented. But these were conventional vehicles, but some researchers up at the University of Delaware took that very incredible data set, and they analyzed it with an eye towards what it meant for electric vehicle uptake. And so there's lots of graphs in this Delaware study, but this is one I really like a lot. Excuse me. Think of the bottom line, the horizontal axis, as how big is the battery? How far can the car go on one charge? And then think of the vertical axis as a measure of how flexible the driver or the owner is in adapting their behavior to the fact that this car is a little different than what they've had before with their conventional internal combustion cars. And that vertical axis is expressed in days per year that require the driver to change their behavior in some way. And so and then the contour lines that you see here represent the fraction of the fleet. The entire fleet is to the left and below this 100%, this line that says 1 on it. And so different fractions of the fleet. So I've gone in and just totally arbitrarily, I've said drivers aren't very adaptable, they're not very flexible. And so they're only going to be willing to change their behavior 1 day a month. And that's my dotted blue line here. It's a totally arbitrary decision on my part. I just put it there. But even if drivers really are that inflexible, the present generation, the short range present version of the Nissan Leaf, I think of this as Nissan Leaf 2.0, and there's a longer range version that I think of as 2.5. But the 150-mile Nissan Leaf could have replaced about 85% of the cars in that test seamlessly. A first generation Chevy Bolt with 238-mile range could have replaced them all. And if you go to the Chevy dealer and buy a new 2020 Bolt, it goes 259 miles. It gets another 20 miles in there. So the electric vehicles can handle this really easily. The other thing, hang on, I lost my train of thought here. Oh yeah, the other thing about it is you need to understand how rigidly this study defines adaptation. If you trade cars with your spouse for the day, that's an adaptation. If you charge at anywhere that's not your home, that's an adaptation. And so it's really important to understand that there are electric vehicle charging stations everywhere you go. Every electric outlet is potentially a place to charge your electric car. A typical 120 volt, 15 amp outlet, you typically run 12 amps through that outlet on a continuous kind of a basis, just for a little cushion. But a typical household outlet can put 5 miles per hour of added range. It'll add 5 miles of range to your battery for every hour you're plugged in. And at Duke Energy's retail rate, residential rate here in Asheville, that electricity will cost you 15 cents. It's about 3 cents a mile. Now, what has happened is a whole bunch of people out there, malls, grocery stores, chambers of commerce, people like that have seen the value of electric vehicle charging as a loss leader to bring people in. And they're actually putting chargers up that charge 4 times that fast, that do more like 20 miles an hour, because at their commercial rates, it only costs about 40 cents, 45 cents an hour for them to do that. So if you go to Ingles, for example, and you charge, if you just buy gasoline there at their gas station, they'll give you 5 cents or 10 cents off, depending on how much you bought. But if you go to the chargers that they've installed, those chargers hold you indoors longer if you really want to take advantage of that electricity. And so all you got to do is make one impulse purchase while you're sitting inside. Buy 1 cup of coffee at Starbucks. You've more than paid their cost for having that thing there. And so everybody's doing this, grocery stores, malls, all sorts of things. This is probably a good point to discuss charging levels. Again, those standard household sockets that'll give you about 5 miles of range per hour, they're called level 1. That's a Society of Automotive Engineers specification. If you can also install chargers, the ones down at Ingles use 240 volt electricity. And you can install those at home on your clothes dryer socket, or the kind of socket you'd use for an oven or a welder. It's power at a level that you do have it in your home. They'll give you about 20 miles an hour, and I'm being a little conservative with the 20. I'm probably about right with the 5 miles. But both of those types of chargers, level 1 and level 2, typically use what they call a J1772 plug. So the plug is standardized by SAE, the Society of Automotive Engineers. And so they all use the same one. Teslas don't use it, but they have an adapter that allows you to plug those chargers into a Tesla. And then there's a third level. And those two, again, level 1, 2, you might have at your house. There's a third level called DC fast charging, and it's not an SAE term, but they've come to be known as level 3, and pretty widespread that way. But they use industrial strength electricity of a type you don't have at your home. You can't afford it. In fact, you can't even afford the charger. The charger costs more than a new Tesla does. So there are 3 types of these DC fast chargers. There's a variation on the SAE standard that's called CCS, because it combines the other plug with a high-speed DC charger. There's a Japanese standard called CHAdeMO, and then there's Tesla uses its own standard. All of these DC fast chargers will get you to about 80% charge from dead, from zero, in 20 to 80 minutes. And most of them are closer to 30 is about the right number. It depends on the car you're trying to charge. And those DC fast chargers, they're important for 2 groups of people. They're important for people who can't charge at home or at work, who need to charge relatively quickly. And they're important for people who want to take road trips, because when you're on the road, you don't want to be sitting at a charger only getting 20 miles an hour back. So people will talk as if that charging infrastructure doesn't exist, but the fact is it does. It's all over the place. Tesla has its own network. Every one of those red dots is a Tesla supercharger. You can travel pretty seamlessly, and in fact, they charge so fast that when I went to Minneapolis last summer in my Tesla, I had to interrupt several fast food meals. I'm eating a hamburger at McDonald's, and I can't eat it as fast as the car charges. So they charge really fast. It's not as fast as fueling up, but you can run in and you can do something else like eat lunch or go to the bathroom or whatever, and they charge really fast. Tesla's network is really nice because it's all unified. It's one network that Tesla installed, and so you don't even have to swipe a credit card. You just plug it in to your car. The charger recognizes your car and bills your credit card. Though I haven't gotten a bill for this since last fall, and I won't until the end of June, because they made it free in response to Hurricane Dorian. It was all over the country, well, at least this part of the country. I'm not sure about all of the country. Everywhere I've been with it, it has been free since Hurricane Dorian hit. The other 2 standards aren't, there are actually more chargers out there, more places to charge, but slightly fewer cords. They don't, Tesla tends to install like 10 cords at a site. A lot of the DC, CCS and CHAdeMO chargers get installed a couple of cords at a site. And so there's more locations, a lot more locations, but not quite as many cords yet. So that's changing. It may even, by today, it may actually be more cords than Tesla, as well as more locations. This particular map, I couldn't pull up on PlugShare, is an app that you use to find chargers, and I couldn't pull up the whole country because you wouldn't have been able to really read it. There were too many chargers. So I pulled up a stretch of the country that basically goes from St. Louis up here, Memphis down here, the corner over here is Northern Virginia, over close to DC, and then this is down eastern North Carolina, not quite to Wilmington. But anyway, you can see how many, and this is just CHAdeMO and CCS chargers, no Tesla chargers, no 1772 chargers. The issue, though, is that there are over 18 networks here, whereas that Tesla map I showed you is one unified network. So this is probably a good time for me to give a shout out to the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. They let me blog about EVs on their website, cleanenergy.org. So far, we've posted 4 blogs, and they all have to do with demystifying EV charging. So there's a lot of what I've said, but there's also a whole lot more nuance and filling in the gaps and some pictures and things like that on that website. The other thing that SACE has done that is really wonderful, I think, is they have 4 level 2 cords out back in the parking lot. They have a big PV array on a tracker, and it's free to members. It's close to downtown Asheville. So if you need to run an errand for 2 hours downtown, this is right on the edge of downtown Asheville. All you gotta do is join SACE, and you can not only have a pretty good parking space for a couple hours, but you can charge your car on sunshine, drive on sunshine. So on that note, I'd like to turn it over to the Q&A. Remember, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and Judy will read questions to me. So Judy, take it away.
Okay, Dave, wonderful. A lot of compliments on your presentation, so thank you very much. All right, question number 1, recycling and disposing of batteries after their life is over.
Okay, great, excellent question. First off, all of the materials in batteries, in any of the chemistries that we're looking at these days, are recyclable. The batteries are designed from the get-go to be recyclable because several at the European Union and certain places over in Asia already have cradle to grave laws for the manufacturer of the car is responsible for the materials in that car from start to finish, from cradle to grave. So all the materials are recycling. The battery packs are designed for recycling. And the greatest thing about it is that they actually will be reused. An awful lot of them, most of them probably, when this industry matures a little bit, will be reused, because at the point where a battery won't really drive your car effectively, it won't have adequate acceleration or range. It'll have lost something that you demand in the performance. It still has a lot of life in it. And so all the car manufacturers and all the battery manufacturers are working with typically utility partners, to do stationary reuse of the batteries before they get recycled. They'll do grid support with those batteries. So it's a fantastic opportunity for both for businesses and for the environment.
Okay, Dave, number 2, problem with cost. Looking at maybe $40,000 for the basic EV, plus the cost of installing for 240 volts. The cold reduces the miles per charge, and evidently that makes it half or less of the advertised number of miles. So
it's not half unless you drive really aggressively, but it does reduce it.
So problem, this particular person wound up just buying a Toyota Camry as an affordable hybrid.
Okay, the first thing that I would say is you don't have to go full on battery electric. Plug-in hybrids have the plug and pick up that benefit of plugging in, and yet you can drive them just like your gas car when you go on a cross-country trip or something like that. So I would really strongly encourage people to look at plug-in hybrids if they think they can't live with the range of a pure battery electric vehicle. Second thing that I heard you say, and I don't want this to slip my mind, you don't have to install that $1,000 level 2 charger in your house. A level 1 charger will replenish 5 miles an hour, and so that's somewhere between 40 and 80 miles a night, right? It takes 20 seconds to charge an electric car most of the time. It takes 10 to plug it in and 10 to unplug it. And in between, you're eating dinner, you're sleeping, you're bouncing the baby on your knee, you're doing other things, you're shopping at the grocery store. And so you really need to think of these cars more and charging them more like your cell phone and less like your gasoline vehicle. The only exception to that being if you don't have access at home or work to charging, or if you're taking a road trip. And again, those networks of fast chargers are out there, and they're fast. They're really fast. You can barely finish a fast food meal. So if you want to take a lot of road trips, I don't recommend you do that with an 84-mile first-generation Nissan Leaf. You'll be stopping way too much. Even if you have the CHAdeMO fast charger, you'll be stopping way too much. But if you've got a car that can go 200 miles, which most of the newer ones are being designed to go 200 plus miles, that's 3 hours of highway driving. Now, if you get aggressive or if it's really cold outside, yes, that will be cut down. It might be cut down about 30% would be the number I would use. If you're really aggressive, maybe you could push it worse than that, but that's a pretty good number. And so you really want to balance the time that you lost doing that with all the time you would have lost taking your car for oil changes, taking your car for timing belt replacements, taking your car or taking yourself to work long enough to earn the $1,500 a year that you save by driving electric. And then finally, the cost issue. You don't have to spend $40,000 to get an electric car. I have one in my basement that I paid $12,700. That's total, all in. It's a car that was never sold in North Carolina new, but it was 3 years old. It had 16,000 miles on it, and I paid $12,700, and that includes the car, the tax, the tags, the title, and transporting it here from California. It's been for 3 years on a lease in Roseville, California. You can find EVs, depending on what you're willing to work with, you can find EVs down in the $5,000 range. Now, it's worth spending a little more than that, but I'm of the opinion it's worth spending a lot more than $2,000 for a gasoline car too. That's kind of the equivalence there. So anyway, I hope that answers that question.
Dave, there are a number of questions about what is your favorite model, and a number of questions asking, would you compare the Tesla to the Leaf, and did you buy a Tesla Model 3, and does it compare to your Leaf?
Okay, I personally own, I used to have a Leaf. That was the car that was in that picture that Beth and I were in. I bought it used, very, very attractive price. Again, used EVs are the deal of the century right now. Between the tax credit and the fact that people are overly and unrealistically scared about battery life, and the fact that people are unrealistically and overly optimistic about the miracle battery coming down the road, used EVs are really cheap. They're way cheaper than comparable age and mileage and serviceability, usability internal combustion cars. But I own two of them right now. I have had three. I had a Nissan Leaf, which we loved, and it's not a car for road trips. That's the reality of the shorter range cars like that, the 84-mile car. Presently I have two cars that are basically polar opposites. I've got a Chevy Spark EV, which is it's a tiny little city car, and that most of them that you see are gasoline, but they built about 7,500 of them as what electric vehicle people call a compliance car. It's to meet California law. They built enough of them to satisfy the letter of the law in California. But it's a really neat car. It's the perfect actual car because it's so tiny you can park it anywhere. And it's kind of the polar opposite of my Tesla Model 3, which is the perfect road trip car in my eyes. It's quiet. It costs you 3 cents a mile. On the supercharger system, it cost me about 5 cents a mile to go to Minneapolis and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan this summer. And then about a third of my miles weren't even on the supercharger system. They were free at hotels. And so the Tesla and the Spark are kind of polar opposites, but I love them both dearly. Leafs are great cars. The one thing I will say about Leafs, don't buy one of the really early ones. That they did have some battery problems. So if I was buying a used Leaf, I'd make it 2015 or newer. Let me remind people, I'm seeing about hand raising. Please send questions to Judy through the Q&A function on your screen.
Thank you, Dave.
Anyway,
a couple of questions about the million-mile battery, the Tesla project, or the mystery battle battery. Is it likely to be developed? Would it be a game changer?
I think there is a possibility it will be developed. I would estimate that I have a long-range battery Model 3, and I would estimate that the battery in that car is going to last probably 600,000 miles. That's it's not conservative and it's not aggressive. It's a pretty realistic estimate. Now, it's pretty rare that people own a car for 600,000 miles. So I don't think it's technologically unlikely that you'll see the million-mile battery. I think it's marketing economically unlikely that you'll see it, because the rest of the car is probably going to fall apart before it hits 1 million miles. There's the occasional Volvo driver who does that, but there's a reason those folks get a lot of publicity. They're rare.
Next question, development of EV for pickup trucks or minivans, other.
Okay, you can already buy a plug-in hybrid minivan. There's the plug-in hybrid version of the Chrysler Pacifica, and actually it's interesting the way it's priced. If you can take advantage of the $7,500 tax credit, it's actually cheaper than the regular version, the non-hybrid version. And all of the hybrid version of that car are plug-in hybrid. It baffles me why Chrysler doesn't promote that. Almost nowhere do you see that Chrysler's building a plug-in hybrid. It's even kind of rare they even mention that it's a hybrid. But anyway, the plug-in hybrid version is cheaper if you can take advantage of the tax credit than buying the regular version of the Pacifica minivan. There are some larger SUVs that have the same kind of interior volume as a minivan that are out there, the Mitsubishi Outlander and a couple others. Some of them are plug-in hybrids. The pure battery electric ones tend to be kind of on the pricey end. Pickup trucks, they're probably about a year away. And so my personal view is if you really have Sierra Club values and you really don't want to put a gas guzzling pickup truck on the road for the next 20 years by going and buying a new one, I'd wait. If I'm driving a pickup truck and I hold Sierra Club values, I'm going to keep it running for another year or so until I can buy. There's about 3 of them that are going to come out in about a year.
That follows are the automakers coming out with more EVs? And as they do you think the prices will come down?
Well, absolutely absolutely to both of those questions. There's about 40, maybe 50 models available in the market right now in the U.S. Not all of them are available in every state, but most of them you can go online and you can import them like I did with my Spark. The prices are definitely going to come down. You got to understand that tax credit, that tax credit, the right wing loves to talk about how it's welfare for the rich. It's just helping rich people buy their expensive toys. But that's not what that tax credit is. That tax credit was always intended from day one, and it has been acting since day one as an incentive to auto manufacturers to start developing electric vehicles. Manufacturers are the world's greatest experts at figuring out how to price and market their cars in order to extract the absolute maximum revenue from their purchaser. And then dealers are even better experts at playing this shell game that they call the Foursquare in order to keep you off balance so they can extract more money out of you. And so the price of the cars new is actually about $75 higher than it will be because they can get away with it, because the tax credit allows them to get that from somebody. What has happened, it's really instructive to look at the 2 manufacturers whose tax credits have expired. It has a sunset on it. After a manufacturer builds 200,000 plug-in cars, it starts to go away over the next several quarters. And both Tesla and General Motors have run past that sunset and no longer have the tax credit. Tesla took, and they kind of did a little juggling with their pricing and their option packages, their equipment packages, but they managed to avoid dropping the price very much when the tax credit went away by expanding out into other countries, selling into import markets where they had not been selling. And that allowed them to hold their price up. General Motors, when the tax credit expired on the Bolt at the end of March, they immediately started slapping $8,500 rebates from the factory onto it. And I can assure you, neither of those companies would be making those cars new and selling them if they weren't making money on them, if they weren't making margin. So most of the cars, most of the more mainstream cars, not the luxury ones like the Tesla, they're already overpriced by about that $7,500 tax credit. As soon as the credit goes away, you'll see the price drop in line. You might have to to fight for it. I mean, the sticker on that bolt is still $43,000 or whatever. And the dealer is probably not going to tell you about that factory rebate if you don't ask. So, but it's there for everybody to take.
Questions about self-driving cars. Wouldn't that be better for the environment? And when are we going to have a Tesla that's self-driving?
I think it's a non-issue for the environment. It really doesn't impact the environmental performance of the car, unless, well, I shouldn't say that, unless it replaces a super aggressive, inefficient driver with a relatively smooth robot. In that case, a self-driving car. My worry with self-driving cars is when you get to these self-driving taxi services and such, car sharing platforms like Lyft and Uber, they actually increase the number of miles that are traveled because they're not sitting there in your garage and they don't get parked at the place where you go, to work or whatever. They come get you. There's extra miles involved in doing that. Then they take you where you're going, and then they go get somebody else, and there's deadhead miles there that add to vehicle miles traveled, not reduce it. Now, you can get an argument about that. Some people will say, yeah, but if you're using car sharing services, you're less likely to use cars in general. You'll structure your life better to avoid being in a car. You'll live more locally if you're using those services. I can't argue with that, but I'm concerned. I don't think it's a slam dunk. I don't think it's a done deal.
If EVs are so much better than gas cars, why do you think people are not making the transition faster, or are they?
They are making it a lot faster than most people realize. Okay, that's the first piece. But I think the main reason that people aren't, people who care about this sort of thing, who care about the environment, who care about energy security, who care about all the kinds of things, who care about reducing the flow of money to oil companies who then use it to funnel it to lobbyists through these dark money organizations. People who care about the things that electric vehicles can address and address really strongly get scared. But there are orchestrated campaigns. I can't overstate this enough. It doesn't take a conspiracy to maintain the status quo. All it takes is for people who have a vested interest in the status quo to defend their position. And so a lot of that defense is happening through what's known as FUD, F-U-D. There are these campaigns to spread fear, uncertainty, and doubt, to get people to say, the technology's not really there. I'm going to buy one more electric car. And I know so many people who care about Sierra Club values, but who are in that stage where they're just afraid because they've been intentionally scared by people. And it's not just the oil industry that does this. There's tremendous money to be made shorting the stock of, especially Tesla, but all sorts of electric vehicle related stocks. And so people from hedge funds push out the FUD campaigns to drive those stock prices down and get the temporary bump down that will allow them to pick up a lot of money. There's millions to be made shorting a stock if you do it well. There's also billions to be lost if you see what happened with Tesla this year. So hopefully those folks go bankrupt as a result of Tesla stock going up so much this year. Anyway, next question.
Question about unusual minerals that have to go into the batteries. Question from Michael Moore's movie.
Okay. First off, I have to comment about that movie. I think there are some legitimate comments in that movie. It's not entirely off base, and the emphasis on biomass is spot on. It's not just a crime against nature; it's a crime against humanity. But and frankly, some of the criticisms of us, Sierra Club, and other environmental groups getting co-opted by the greenwashing campaigns of corporate America are legitimate, I think. But the almost all of the technical information, if Ozzy Zahner's mouth was open, it was, whoops, I was just about to say something that probably shouldn't go on a recording. It was nonsense. It was not supportable by data. Yes, there are materials in those batteries. Yes, there's energy embodied in those wind turbine blades and in the batteries and things like that. But it's just false what was said in that movie about these technologies not being sustainable. You can, in fact, shift society to 100% renewable electricity. All it requires is that your generating technology, your windmill or your solar panel or whatever, be capable of generating more energy than it takes to make it, more energy through its lifetime than it takes to make it. And they're a slam dunk. It's just no contest. Same thing is true with electric vehicles. People will tell you that there is too much energy or some other environmental damage embodied in manufacturing that vehicle, and that you can never make it up in the course of the lifetime operation of the vehicle. It's just nonsense. It's utter lie. It's either an ignorant statement or it's a dishonest statement. I don't know which, but neither one of those is a good thing. And I can actually show you a slide on that if we want to come back to it. I'll let the Q&A session dictate that.
Are there any EVs or hybrids that can pull a trailer?
Yes, they tend to be on the more expensive end. If the trailer's small, I personally wouldn't be disinclined to mount a trailer hitch on some of the cars that claim you can't tow with them, if the trailer is really small. But if you're towing a boat or a big camper or something like that, you need some of the things like the Tesla Model X, some of the bigger ones, and most of them will let you know it because it's a big selling point for them.
Question about that, yes, EVs are good, but they use electricity and that requires power plants, and therefore we will need more power plants.
I already covered that one, and actually they don't require more power plants, and let me show a slide on that one. That one is worth going to a different slide. Okay, this is a day in the life of California 13 years ago, and it's a little different now, and I'll talk about it in what's different in a minute. But we predict the usage of electricity in several ways. Electricity has fairly predictable patterns in how it gets used, the demand for electricity. So if you can see the light dotted gray line right here, that's a 24-hour in advance prediction of California's electric usage, 24 hours in advance. And then what happens is there's an auction that's run by this entity here, CAISO, the California Independent System Operator. And people who have generators will put auction bids in, and they'll say, I'll give you X amount of electricity at this hour if you'll pay me Y dollars, a certain number of dollars per megawatt hour. And so the green line up here is all the resources that bid into that auction on that day. And then electricity is the most perishable commodity in the world. It's always consumed at exactly the instant it is generated. Whether it's consumed productively or not does not matter. It'll just burn up in the wires somewhere if there's not somebody to buy it. But you have to match it constantly in real time, second by second. I think they adjust it like every 15 minutes or something like that, because it is somewhat predictable. But anyway, the red line here is the actual amount that was demanded on that day. Well, this green block, I've just inserted it. The president of AC Propulsion gave me this map, this slide a long time ago, and I love it. That's enough electricity if in fact you dedicated that much generating capacity, which is all above the red line and below the green line, to charging EVs. You could charge 3 million EVs in the state of California with that batch of electricity. You would never have to build another power plant to do it. And that's actually not, this is useful to show that that's 42 gigawatt hours, but let me show it a little differently. This is how it would really happen. What you would do is you would find ways to incentivize customers to charge when you wanted them to charge. Duke already does this. Duke, other utilities already do this. They will pay you $25 a year if you'll let them have some control of your air conditioner. if you'll let them, they'll pay you another 25 if you'll let them have control of your water heater, and another 25 if you'll let them have control of the heat strips on your heat pump. And so you can make up to $75 a year credit on your electricity bill just by giving them a little control that you will never even notice them taking. They'll take it in such short bits of time that you never even noticed that your water heater wasn't on for that period of time, or your heater wasn't on, or your air conditioner wasn't on. And so that's what you'll do with electric vehicles too. They represent a wonderful dispatchable load. And so you'll find ways as a utility to get people to charge when you want them to. Well, if you can get them to charge the way these blue, this is the same 42 gigawatt hours worth of generation that I had showed in green on the previous slide. But now we've got a situation where the electric demand through the day goes from 28 gigawatts up to 31 and back to 28. It's operating in a much narrower range. Haven't built a single new power plant. And in fact, that by being able to operate it more smoothly than that, it's going to lower everybody's electric rates, because you won't have to build any new power plants. You'll be amortizing the existing power plants over a lot more kilowatt hours. Now, this is, like I said, this is 13 years old, and things have changed in California in 13 years. There's what's known as the duck curve that you'll hear people talk about. And that's happening because there's a whole lot of solar online now, and it puts this belly in here in the middle of the day. This used to be one of the peak times of the day, but because there's a lot of solar generating there, as far as the utilities are concerned, it looks like a low. It looks like the off-peak time now. And so what you can do with electric vehicles is you can incentivize them to charge there, and basically they're driving on sunshine. It's a great thing. It's a great way through your rate structures or whatever, however else you can do it, a demand response project, or however you plan to do it. There's lots of ways to do it. You can use those EVs as storage for the wind and solar that you might have to curtail and allow to just not be generated because there's nowhere for it to go. Oh, one more thing about the duck curve for people who've heard about that. This is the kind of graph you usually see about the duck curve, because people are wringing their hands and lighting their hair on fire over the fact that it's going to be the disaster. It's going to be a disaster. They're trying to imply that somehow this belly is going to go too low. This is what the duck curve really looks like. They always display it with the bottom somewhere other than zero. There's a whole lot of water under that duck. It's floating in a pretty deep pond. And so there's lots of room left to generate more solar, especially if you have a way to soak it up with electric vehicles. Next question.
Okay, Dave, a couple of questions about gasoline taxes, that electric cars are not going to wind up paying gas taxes, and how we
pay $130 in North Carolina. We pay $130 a year above what a gasoline car pays to register our car. So there's a special electric vehicle tax fee, whatever you want to call it, that's designed to make up that gas tax difference. And actually, I don't mind paying it a bit. I think you'll find most electric vehicle owners are perfectly happy to do our part. What I do mind is last summer, a year ago, the legislature was trying to double that. And Beth and I already, by having 2 electric cars, we already pay about twice what we used to pay, what we would be paying in gasoline taxes, because we've always driven a very efficient gasoline cars. And so $260 a year is about double what we would be paying in gasoline taxes if we were driving gas cars. So we're already overpaying. Again, I don't mind it. Most electric vehicle owners don't mind it. But the notion that I'm going to get penalized by having them take that double or higher, I'm sorry, that's just the Koch brothers in action. That's fossil fuel money trying to kill electric cars. And fortunately, the legislature got enough pushback last year that they didn't do it, but they tried.
We're just going to take maybe 2 more questions. And Dave, at the end, I'd like you to post your contact information again so people can write to you the question you didn't get to. But a couple of specific recommendations for PV solar. Do you recommend some kits or some companies? He mentions 2 companies, but they're too expensive or not usable.
Let me comment a little bit about solar. I don't understand why anybody who owns a house would find solar to be too expensive. Again, I showed that slide. I save more on my electric bill than it adds to my mortgage, and it's by a pretty good margin. And that slide that I showed left out 3 really important things. I didn't include, and all of them work in favor of solar, not against it. I did not include on that slide the fact that mortgage interest is deductible on your taxes. I didn't include on that slide the Duke Energy rebate, and I did that one not for simplicity's sake, but because that rebate is actually a little too rich. It sells out in like 3 minutes. It's only available once a year. You go online to sign up for it, and it's fully subscribed within, it's certainly like less than an hour. It's a really short period of time. So to me, that says it's too rich. It's offering too much per person. It should be spreading it out more. But so it's not a given that you'll get the Duke Energy rebate. And so I didn't include that. And the other thing that I didn't include, which I don't understand why, but I've only seen a few of the solar installers ever acknowledge the fact putting solar on your roof adds value to your house. You don't have to live in your house long enough for that 30-year cash flow sequence that I showed on that spreadsheet to work its way out. It costs about under $3 a watt to put solar on your roof. There's a 26% tax credit, so that's what, about 78 cents, I think, that immediately knocks that down away from to lower than $3 a watt. But there's been studies done that show that putting solar on your house adds like $4.50 a watt to the value of your house. So it's one of the few home renovation things you can do that actually adds more value to your house than it costs you to do it. And that's before you consider the tax credit. So I don't understand why anybody thinks that solar is too expensive. Unless you just simply are poor and can't get the credit or something like that.
All right, last question, Dave, and then I want you to put up your contact information.
It's there.
Okay, and the question is, recommend something equal to a Tesla 3 that's not so expensive. What would be your favorite EVs?
Yeah, okay. Any EV that can do over 200 miles on a charge is a road trip capable EV. So there's a bunch of them out there. There's the Kia Niro. There's the Hyundai Kona, has an electric version. Those 2 vehicles also have other versions, gasoline and hybrid version, charge-sustaining hybrid versions too. But the Hyundai Kona has an EV, a battery EV with over 200 mile range. The Kia Niro does. The Chevy Bolt does. And again, Bolts are really a deal right now. The factory's putting $8,500 rebate on the hood, and that's before you negotiate with the dealer. So the dealer might knock off more than that, or knock off an amount in addition to that if you negotiate well. So those 3 are the ones that come to mind as road trip capable cars. There's others out there. One really good source of information is an entity called Plug-in America, and it's just no spaces or anything like that, pluginamerica.org. And Plug-in America has an electric vehicle guide which shows every car that's on the market in the US as of whenever was the most recent time they published it. You can download it in PDF form from pluginamerica.org. That's a good place to look. The other thing, let me strongly encourage people, if you want to call me or email me, I'd love to continue this conversation one-on-one. If you want me to talk to a group, I'd love to do that too. This is my favorite topic in life. I love it. If we didn't have a virus lockdown, I'd let you drive either of my cars. So.
Dave, just to follow up, they said that Hyundai and Kia are not selling in North Carolina.
Right, you have to go elsewhere to get them, but I think you can get them in Georgia. I know you can get them in Kentucky, and that's the people I know here who have them have gone to one of those two places.
Okay. Dave, we want to thank you so very much. And obviously, you will be open to further questions, comments. I want to invite you back July 2nd to learn about Bear Wise, Barely There, Safe Encounters, and history and biology of bears, everything you could possibly want to know about the black bear here in North Carolina. So Dave, thank you. It was excellent.
Thank you.